My name is Elena, and I never imagined the day my heart would fracture like thin glass. I remember sitting alone in my dimly lit apartment, the gentle hum of the city outside barely audible. My hands hovered over my phone, each finger trembling as if it carried its own fear. I had just returned from that ordinary coffee date, one I replayed in my mind like a warped film reel. We sat across from each other in our favorite corner booth, the same chipped mug steaming between us. She smiled that warm, familiar smile, the one I thought was meant only for me. And then I learned the truth. When the notification appeared, I froze. A love note he'd written me, sweet, sincere words dancing on the screen, had been twisted into betrayal. Forwarded to colleagues I barely spoke to, each message dripping with a mocking caption. My chest tightened. The note had been mine, a private confession of devotion, and now it was weaponized against me. My mouth went dry, a dull ache spread from my throat to my limbs. I wanted to scream but found only silence. That night, I replayed every moment with her. The laugh we shared when I told a story about my childhood. The softness in her gaze as she listened. I had confided in her my deepest fears, my insecurities about my career, my dreams of marriage and family, never imagining she'd turn those secrets into shrapnel aimed at my heart. The next morning, I called her, my voice rough as gravel. Why did you do it? I asked, though part of me already knew. She hesitated, her words catching somewhere between guilt and indifference. I thought you deserved to know what he was saying, she murmured, her eyes flickering away. The excuse felt hollow, obscene. I left that call with a thirst for justice burning in my veins. I realized I needed more than an apology. I needed her to feel the same gut punch of betrayal. So I began collecting fragments of her deceit, screenshots of her messages, stray comments she'd made on social media, every hesitation in her voice when she claimed ignorance. My mind plotted each move like an artist sketching a masterpiece of retribution. I crawled through every memory, searching for cracks in her story, times she disappeared without explanation, subtle shifts in her tone when I mentioned him. Each discovery sharpened my resolve. My heart hammered, and my breath came in sharp, uneven gasps. I felt the weight of my own rage, heavy and molten, pooling in my chest. When I was ready, I staged our next meeting at that same café. The ambient noise faded as I watched her stir her coffee, oblivious to the trap I'd set. I slid a small envelope across the table. Inside were printed excerpts of her messages, highlighted passages of betrayal, and a single line typed boldly, "Now you feel what I felt." She froze, eyes widening, lips parting in silent shock. Her hands shook, and a faint tremor ran through her body, her vulnerability laid bare. She stammered an apology, her voice cracking. In that moment, pity and triumph collided inside me. I saw the reflection of my own pain mirrored in her tear-filled eyes. My jaw clenched, and tears I hadn't expected stung my own cheeks. I realized the line between justice and cruelty was thinner than I'd believed. That moment marked the beginning of my true journey. A journey where every step was deliberate, every gesture loaded with intent. I had shattered the mirror of our bond, and now I watched the fragments fall, glinting, jagged, and irrevocable. And as I stepped back from the wreckage, I understood that some reflections, once broken, could never be restored. Shards glinted at my feet as I stepped out of the cafe, the autumn air cool against my flushed cheeks. I wrapped my coat tighter, trying to steady the tremor in my hands. I kept replaying her face, pale, eyes wide, when she realized I held her secrets like daggers. I felt a pull, like being hooked, drawing me deeper into whatever I'd begun. In the days that followed, I drifted through my routines like someone half asleep. Morning started with a bitter cup of coffee, its steam fogging my glasses as I stared blankly at the steam trails. I could almost feel her presence behind me, the weight of her betrayal pressing on my shoulder. My breath caught whenever my phone buzzed, each notification sent a ripple of dread through my chest. Was it a reply from her, another apology? Or another lie? I spent afternoons at my desk, poring over everything I'd collected, message transcripts, screenshots of her uneasy confessions, the mocking captions she'd used. Each fragment felt like a clue in a twisted puzzle. I marked the times she'd changed her story, the moments she rambled about fatigue or mysterious doctor visits, slips I'd almost dismissed. But now those slips glowed on the page, irrefutable. Sometimes I stumbled across little hints of something deeper, a crumpled receipt from a pharmacy, dated late at night, a photograph on her social feed, half hidden, of her lying in a hospital bed, a stray reference to medication she denied taking. My stomach twisted into knots when I realized she'd silently carried this burden alone. And in that moment, for a flicker of time, guilt pooled at the bottom of my heart. But it was drowned by betrayal's echo. She'd used her pain to justify hurting me. I paced my apartment, phone in hand, imagining how she might feel if the tables turned. I could see her flicking through contacts, searching for someone, anyone, to lean on. The thought hit me like a wave. If I wanted her to understand the chaos she'd caused, I had to mirror her isolation. So I started subtle. I sent offhand messages to mutual friends, hinting that something serious had happened between us. I edited a group chat screenshot to show her angrily accusing me of secrets. No one asked questions. People believe what they see, and I made sure they saw the version I wanted. At night, I lay awake, listening to my heart pound, my body so tense that my limbs ached. My jaw would lock, and my hands would tremble until I fell into restless sleep. I dreamed of her face cracking like porcelain, her voice begging for understanding. Waking up, I felt that same hollow ache, as if revenge had already begun to hollow me out. One evening, I lured her back to our old haunt, the rooftop garden above the art gallery where we used to share dreams. Twinkling lights hung overhead, and the city stretched below like a living tapestry. I waited, leaning against the brick parapet, the night breeze tugging at my hair. When she arrived, I saw the dark circles under her eyes, the way she hesitated before smiling. She looked fragile, like a bird with a broken wing. I offered her a seat, and silence rolled between us. Somewhere in the distance, traffic hummed. I saw her fingers fidget, twisting the strap of her bag. My heart drummed. "You wanted to talk," I said softly. She nodded, voice barely a whisper. I didn't know how to fix it," she sighed, eyes shifting to the skyline. I was scared. I could almost taste the apology she wanted to spill. But instead I reached into my pocket and pulled out a single photograph, her in that hospital bed, pale and vulnerable. I let it slip onto her lap. Her breath hitched as she recognized it. My chest tightened. "You never told me," I said, voice cracking. "You used your fear as an excuse to break us." The words hurt, but I needed her to feel this sting. Tears welled in her eyes. She whispered, "I was so lost. I thought you'd leave me if you knew." Her confession trembled through the night air. For a moment, empathy flared, mingled with the cold of betrayal. I watched her shrink under my gaze, and I realized the cost of my revenge, the broken trust, the painful mirror we'd both become. She sat there, trembling, the city lights reflecting in her tears. And as I looked at her, I understood that this game of mirrors had changed me, too. The jagged edges I'd created would never be soothed. In seeking to make her hurt, I'd uncovered a darkness in myself, one that might never fade. That evening, the storm of our rooftop meeting trailed me home like a persistent echo. I closed my apartment door with a trembling hand, the latch clicking shut as though sealing me in a cage. I sank onto the edge of my bed, the city lights below pulsing through the curtains like distant warnings. My heart pounded so loud I thought it might burst through my ribs, my jaw felt locked, and a cold tremor ran down my spine. I reached into my bag and withdrew the 2 pieces of evidence I'd collected, proofs that would finish what I'd started. My fingers curled around the first, a crumpled photograph I'd smuggled from her apartment. Proof 1, a grainy hospital snapshot showing her frail frame in a pale gown, tubes snaking from her arm, eyes closed against the fluorescent glare. In the corner, a date scrawled in blue ink, months before she'd confessed her betrayal. I traced the scrawl with my thumb, feeling the printed paper buckle under my touch. My breath hitched, a sob caught in my throat, but I swallowed it down. That image, once hidden in her secret drawer, now stared back at me accusingly. My second proof glowed on the phone in my other hand. Proof 2, a screenshot of her late-night text to a clinic consultant. I'm terrified I'll lose her if she knows how sick I am. Please advise. The words trembled across the screen, punctuated by the time stamp, 2:17 a.m. Her plea for help, twisted later into justification for her cruelty, burned in my memory. I tapped the screen until the text expanded, letting her fear ring loud and clear. I closed my eyes, letting the weight of these revelations settle. My body shook, part from outrage, part from guilt. I'd invaded her privacy, but she'd weaponized mine first. My fists clenched, nails digging crescents into my palms. Fresh tears blurred my vision, but I felt no shame, only the raw ache of betrayal and the cold thrill of unfolding justice. A soft knock at the door jolted me upright. My pulse ricocheted. Who could it be at this hour? I cradled my phone like a lifeline and opened the door to the dim hallway. There she stood, her eyes wide and red-rimmed, face pale under the hallway light. She looked smaller than I remembered, her shoulders slumped, the weight of confession pressing on her. I saw your message, she whispered, voice cracking. You know everything. My heart thundered. For a moment, I hesitated, suspended between mercy and ruin. She stepped forward, clutching a sob in her throat. I didn't ask for this. I'm sorry. Her words trembled like autumn leaves in a gale. I swallowed hard, every instinct screaming for retribution. You never gave me a choice, I said, voice low and steady. I held out the photo first, watching her skin blanch as she recognized herself in that vulnerable frame. Then I held up my phone, the text still glowing on the screen. She flinched as if struck. Her body went rigid, tears spilled down her cheeks. Please, she rasped, voice barely audible. I was so scared. I thought you'd hate me forever if you knew. I felt a pit open in my stomach. The empathy I'd buried resurfaced like a tide. I saw her not as the architect of my pain but as a frightened soul who'd lashed out in terror. My hands loosened around the proofs. The air between us pulsed with regret and something I hadn't expected, compassion. But the game wasn't over. I needed her to face her actions fully, to rebuild or be broken by them. I stepped aside, gesturing toward the hallway. Come in, I said softly. The knock on my chest loosened, replaced by a flutter of cautious hope. She entered, head bowed, and I closed the door behind her. The quiet hum of the apartment settled around us, as though giving space for whatever came next. In that hush, I realized revenge had led me here, but forgiveness might be the true reckoning. As I set the proofs on the coffee table, the next move hovered between us like a question waiting to be answered. And in that momentary stillness, I understood, every ending births another beginning. And so, we waited, her trembling in my presence, me bracing for the choice ahead, knowing that what followed would shape us both in irrevocable ways. The morning light felt impossibly gentle after the storm of last night. I woke to the soft hum of the city below, the proofs I'd gathered resting like lead on the coffee table. She lay on the couch, curled beneath the throw blanket I'd dragged from the guest room. For a moment, I just watched her, how thin she looked in sleep, her eyelashes fanning pale cheeks. I realized the distance between us had stretched farther than I'd intended. I rose quietly, every muscle tight, as if bracing for a trap. My footsteps were muffled on the rug as I crossed to the window and drew aside the curtain. The street bustled with life, a delivery truck idling, cyclists weaving through traffic. Normalcy thrummed beyond these walls, but inside, our world was fractured. When I turned back, she was sitting up, hair mussed, eyes shadowed with worry. She tucked a stray lock behind her ear as if embarrassed to be caught in such a vulnerable moment. My chest clenched at the sight. I'd planned to push her harder, force her to face the full weight of her betrayal, but now I hesitated. Compassion, that dangerous undercurrent, threatened to pull me under. She cleared her throat. Elena, I'm sorry, she began, voice delicate as porcelain. Last night, thank you for letting me stay. Her hands fluttered around the edge of the blanket. I remembered how I'd handed her the proofs and watched her shrink beneath their glare. Now, stripped of that armor, she seemed almost childlike in her fear. I swallowed. I need to know you understand why I did what I did. My words felt brittle, like glass underfoot. You used my trust as a weapon. I kept my gaze steady, though my heart drummed so loud I thought she might hear it. She nodded, shoulders trembling. I saw your photos of us, your hope for the future. And I panicked. Her voice cracked. I was so afraid you'd leave me if you knew how broken I was. Tears glistened at the corners of her eyes. I thought if I cut you off first, I'd protect you. But I ended up hurting you instead. Her confession hit me like a wave. Memories of our laughter, our late-night talks, flickered through my mind. Betrayal still burned, but beneath it lay something gentler, the ache of love twisted by fear. My hands, still clutching the envelopes, loosened. I set the photograph and phone down, one after the other, creating space between our past grievances and this fraught dawn. She watched every move, as if unsure whether I'd change my mind. Silence stretched, charged with possibility. Finally, I closed the gap between us and sat on the couch, close but not touching. I'm angry, I admitted, voice low. Angry that you didn't trust me enough to tell me. Angry that you used my life as collateral. I paused, taking a breath. And I'm scared that this changes everything. Her lip trembled. It doesn't have to. I want to make it right, if you'll let me. She reached toward me, as if rehearsing the motion. I'll go with you to doctors, take your hand through every test. No more secrets. I looked into her earnest eyes and felt the tight coil in my chest loosen, just enough that I could breathe. We'll take it one day at a time, I said. My voice cracked, but I meant it. But you have to promise, no more lies, no matter how terrified you feel. I placed a hand over hers. Her skin was warm, a stark contrast to the cold evidence we'd laid bare. A distant siren wailed, and for the first time in days, I didn't flinch. Outside, life went on. Inside, we were choosing to rebuild, and the first tentative stones were already settling into place. I woke to the sound of rain tapping against the window, its steady rhythm a reminder that life outside carried on while ours was shifting. She was still asleep on the couch, curled in the same position as the night before. I rose carefully, mindful of the tightness in my chest, and walked into the kitchen. A kettle sat half-filled, yesterday's tasks lingered. I filled it with cold water and set it to boil, each movement deliberate. When the steam hissed, I poured the hot water into 2 mismatched mugs. One I carried to the couch, placing it on the low table beside her. The other I cradled, the warmth seeping into my palms. I watched as her lashes fluttered open, confusion and gratitude mingling in her eyes. She sat up, shoulders tense, and hugged the mug. I offered a small nod. No words were needed, our promises from yesterday hung between us like fresh paper. A few hours later, we headed to the clinic. The journey felt surreal, the city streets smudged by rain, headlights blurring through droplets. I held her hand in mine, squeezing gently when she flinched at the sharp squeal of tires. Her breath came shallow, lips pressed tight. I felt my heart tighten too, every thump was a vow to stay by her side. We arrived under a gray sky, the building looming. Inside, the receptionist greeted us with a polite smile that never reached her eyes. We sat in the waiting room where magazines were outdated and the air smelled like antiseptic. She traced patterns on her sleeve, fingertips brushing the fabric as if seeking comfort. I reached out, resting my hand over hers. She looked at me, and I saw the turmoil, fear and shame wrestling for dominance. When our name was called, we followed the nurse down a corridor. My hands were slick with sweat, my jaw locked so tight I tasted metal. The doctor introduced himself, his voice calm and steady, and motioned for us to sit. He reviewed her chart, glanced at the photograph I had included, and cleared his throat. She tensed. I squeezed her hand. He explained that her condition required further tests and possible treatment. The words were gentle but carried weight. I felt a flutter in my stomach, like a bird caught in a gale. She exhaled sharply, her back arching as if something heavy had been lifted and dropped all at once. Tears welled, but she blinked them back. I saw her knuckles whiten as she gripped the armrest. After the appointment, we walked back in silence, rain having tapered to a drizzle. I thought she might collapse, her shoulders slumped under the invisible load. At home, she sank onto the couch, head in her hands. I sat beside her, offering the second mug of tea. I placed a hand on her back, feeling the tremor beneath my palm. "I'm scared," she whispered, voice muffled by her hands. I rubbed circles on her shoulder and swallowed. "Me too," I admitted. "But we'll face it together." My own voice sounded foreign, vulnerable. She lifted her head, eyes glossy, and nodded. A single tear rolled down her cheek. Without thinking, I brushed it away, my thumb warm and gentle. Later, she opened up about sleepless nights and shadowed thoughts. Her fear of being a burden, her guilt for dragging me into her darkness. I listened, heart aching with love and pity. My chest felt tight, as though sorrow and understanding had built a dam inside me. Yet beneath it, I sensed a spark of hope, a fragile light guiding us onward. By evening, we had a plan: schedule the next tests, reach out to a support group, and confide in her sister. The idea trembled between us, but commitment eased our tension. We crafted a message together, words hesitating, then flowing. When I sent it, my heart fluttered as if set free. She leaned into me, her head resting on my shoulder. I wrapped my arm around her, my fingers curling into her hair. In the quiet that followed, I realized how far we'd come from anger's edge to this tentative peace. Outside, the world was still turning, and rain had ceased. Inside, two hearts beat uncertainly, united by grief and determination. And as we sat there, the first chapter of our new journey unfolded, a journey of healing, truth, and the unbreakable thread of our bond. Now, we stepped forward together, aware that shadows still lingered, but trusting that, in light or dark, we would navigate what came next. The morning after we sent that trembling message, the sun filtered through rain-spattered curtains, casting fragmented light across the room. I found her at the kitchen table, coffee cooling in a chipped mug, eyes fixed on her phone. Her fingers hovered over the screen, as though waiting for a lifeline. I poured 2 cups, one for me, one for her, and carried them over. Her shoulders jolted at the sound. She looked up, fragile, as though afraid the world might shatter at any moment. Before she could speak, there was a soft knock at the door. My heart lurched. I opened it to reveal her sister, Anna, standing with a supportive smile and a box of herbal teas. Anna's presence felt like a tether to reality, familiar, sacrosanct. She enveloped her sister in a careful hug, and I stepped back, watching the trembling relief in their clasped arms. They moved to the living room, whispering quietly. I overheard Anna's gentle questions: "How are you holding up?" And the hesitant replies, each word weighted. I felt my throat tighten, torn between stepping in and letting them reclaim their sisterly bond. Instead, I poured my own coffee and sat nearby, knuckles white around the mug. After a while, they emerged together. Anna slipped her arm through hers, a protective gesture. "I'll help with appointments, calls, whatever you need," she promised. Her sister's eyes glistened with gratitude and shame, but mostly relief. I felt a pang of compassion. Anger had given way to compassion. Later that afternoon, we attended our first support group session. The room was small, chairs in a circle, strangers' faces hopeful and wary. My friend's hand tightened around mine as we entered, breaths shallow, jaws locked. I squeezed back, encouraging. As others shared their stories, broken trust, hidden illnesses, the ache of isolation, she nodded, tears slipping free. I realized that our pain was part of a larger tapestry, and that confession could be a balm rather than a weapon. When we left, the sky had cleared. She paused in the courtyard, sunlight warming her face. For the first time in days, I saw a tentative smile flicker at the corner of her lips. It was fragile, like new blossom petals, but it was there. My chest loosened, and I returned her smile, letting hope fill the space between us. That evening, we we sat on the balcony, city lights winking below. She took my hand and said, "Thank you for staying." Her voice was steady now, infused with quiet resolve. I leaned my head against her shoulder and whispered, "Always." And as dusk deepened into night, we braced ourselves for the call with her specialist, the next step on this uncertain path. Together, we were learning that healing was a journey of small, brave steps taken side by side. At dusk, as the last light of day slipped behind the skyline, my phone buzzed with her specialist's name. I felt her fingers tighten around mine before I tapped the accept button. "Hello, Ms. Walker," the doctor greeted. My friend inhaled sharply. "Yes," she managed, voice trembling but determined. The doctor's words were measured yet urgent. He explained that recent test results showed a decline in her blood counts, requiring immediate treatment. I saw her shoulders slump, and I squeezed her hand, a silent promise that we would face this together. When the call ended, the apartment felt emptier somehow, as though the echo of his voice lingered in the air. She sank to the couch, head in her hands, the weight of the diagnosis pressing down. I knelt beside her, wrapping my arms around her shaking frame. She rested her head against my chest, and I felt her tears soak through my shirt. "I'm scared," she whispered. I stroked her hair and whispered back, "We'll figure it out." "I'm here." The next morning we woke to a pale sunrise filtering through the curtains. Routine appointments awaited, blood work, scans, consultations. Each movement felt heavy, like walking through water. I packed her bag with neatly folded clothes, water bottles, and an old paperback she loved. She offered a small, grateful smile and kissed my cheek before we left. Outside, the city seemed to blur around us, commuters rushing by while we moved at our own determined pace. In the hospital corridor, I watched her slip into the examination room. The sterile scent of antiseptic stung my nostrils. I took a seat in the waiting area, tapping my foot, my chest tight. Minutes dragged by like hours. I traced the edge of my seat with nervous fingers. Finally, the door opened, and she emerged, face pale and eyes haunted. She nodded at me, stiffening before our embrace. "They'll schedule treatment tomorrow," she said, voice firm even as her lips trembled. I hugged her tightly, relief and dread knotting together inside me. Returning home, we settled into a rigid routine of quiet meals and shared silences. I cooked simple dinners, soup, toast, eggs, whatever she could manage to eat. She sat at the table, chewing slowly, lost in thought. I watched her, love and sorrow mingling in my chest. Between bites, she would ask questions about her prognosis, my plans for work. Each question broke through my defenses, and I answered honestly, though uncertainty lingered. A few days later, I returned to my office. My colleagues greeted me with polite concern when I explained my absence. I could feel their questions behind polite smiles. How was she? Was I okay? I braced myself, deciding how much to share. When I described her illness, I saw empathy in their eyes, but also distance. I realized that some truths, once spoken, changed the landscape of our relationships. Work chatter felt hollow as I excused myself, longing for her presence. That evening, she sat on our balcony, breathing in the cool air. I joined her, wrapping my arm around her shoulders. Below, neon lights twinkled. "You handled that well," she said quietly. I kissed her forehead. "I'll try," I said. A silence stretched between us, comfortable, honest. The city hummed around us, and in that moment, we both understood that our lives had shifted irreversibly. We held on to each other, ready to meet whatever came next, treatment, recovery, or unexpected challenges. And so we leaned into the uncertainty, bound by devotion, ready to face each new dawn together. Tomorrow, as we greet the morning, we carry hope and fear intertwined, step by step forward. The next morning dawned in muted shades of gray, the sky heavy with the promise of rain. I woke to the soft hiss of the radiator and the steady pulse of my own heartbeat, each thump a reminder that today was the day treatment began. I slipped out of bed, careful not to wake her, though I knew sleep had eluded her for hours. On the coffee table lay the envelope with her appointment details, a stark white rectangle bathed in the soft morning light. I brewed coffee and carried 2 steaming mugs to the balcony, where she stood wrapped in the same knit shawl I'd draped over her shoulders last night. She watched the street below, arms crossed, as if bracing herself against the chill. I handed her a mug, her fingers closed around it gratefully, warmth seeping into her skin. She inhaled the aroma deeply, then met my gaze. "Do you think I'm ready?" she whispered, voice almost lost in the wind. I shifted my weight, balancing on one foot. My jaw felt tight, my palms slick. "You're stronger than you know," I said, too aware of how thin those words sounded. "And you won't be alone." I reached out and brushed a loose strand of hair behind her ear. Her eyes fluttered closed at the touch, and I caught the faint scent of lavender from her shampoo. It was such a simple thing, and yet it grounded me. We spent the next hour in near silence, each of us lost in our own thoughts. Below, the city roused itself, horns honking, distant sirens, the low rumble of early buses. Up here, we existed in suspended time, 2 souls tethered by shared fear and fragile hope. When it was time to leave, she folded the crumpled appointment letter and tucked it into her coat pocket. I grabbed my keys, and, almost on a whim, slipped my hand into hers. Her fingers tightened reflexively, and I felt a spark of something I couldn't name: relief, fear, love, all tangled together. At the clinic, the waiting room felt more oppressive than before. The antiseptic scent attacked my senses, and the fluorescent light seemed to buzz with urgency. We found 2 seats side by side. She stared at the floor, knees pressed together so hard her shawl bunched in her lap. I studied her, how the tension in her shoulders mirrored the tremor in her hands. A nurse called her name, and her head jerked up. Fear flickered in her eyes, then she squared her shoulders and stood. I held my breath as she walked down the corridor, disappearing behind a glass door etched with the hospital's logo. I sat there alone, clutching my mug until the vinyl coating bit into my skin. A montage of memories, our laughter, our tears, the moment she betrayed me, the confessions, our fragile reconciliation, flashed through my mind. My hands trembled. Part of me ached to forgive completely, another part whispered that the world was still full of hidden knives. I closed my eyes and counted to 10, willing myself back to the present. Minutes later, the door opened and she emerged, mask in hand, eyes bright with fresh tears. Relief flooded me, and I stood so quickly my chair scraped the floor. She closed the distance between us and wrapped her arms around me, the denim of her coat rough against my sweater. I kissed the top of her head, tasting faint salt. "They'll start the first infusion this afternoon," she murmured against my chest. Her voice was steadier now, laced with a resolve I admired. "I'm ready." I guided her back into the clinic, though she insisted on walking on her own. In the treatment room, she sat in the reclining chair, and I perched on the stool beside her. A nurse hooked tubes into her veins, and I felt a pang in my heart watching the life-giving fluid flow. She winced at the initial pinch, and I brushed my thumb over her knuckles. "They'll monitor you for an hour," the nurse said, adjusting the drip rate. Then she left us alone. We talked quietly, or maybe we just breathed together. I told her about nothing and everything, a silly dream I'd had, the way our cat insisted on sitting on her favorite book, the promise I'd made to take her out for ice cream when this was over. She smiled, a small, genuine curve of her lips that lit her face. I realized that moment was what I'd been fighting for, a return to the everyday, even if it was tinged with fear. Outside the window, clouds broke apart and a thin ribbon of sun slanted into the room. It fell across her shawl, turning the fabric's weave into gold. Her gaze followed the light, and I knew then that our story, fractured by betrayal, tempered by revenge, tested by illness, was still unfolding. We didn't know where it would lead, but for the first time in a long while, we faced the future as one. And so, the current that carried us forward moved a little more steadily. Each breath, each heartbeat, each shared silence became an act of defiance against fear. In that sunlit clinic room, amidst the hum of machinery and the pulse of hope, we took another step down the river of our lives, together. The cab ride home was quiet, the city lights flickering against the window like distant fireflies. She leaned against my shoulder, eyelids heavy with fatigue, and I felt her breath even out as we slipped into a fragile calm. The infusion's side effects hadn't hit yet, nerves tingling, the slow drift of warmth through her veins, and for a moment I allowed myself to believe we'd cleared the worst. But as we climbed the stairs to our apartment, I tightened my grip on her hand, bracing for the tremors I knew would come. Inside, I guided her to the couch and arranged pillows behind her back. The kettle clicked on, steam curling into the dim room, and I fetched a damp cloth from the bathroom. Her forehead was cool to the touch, but there was a faint fever in her cheeks. She closed her eyes and murmured my name, as though reluctant to let go of that small sliver of consciousness. I pressed the cloth to her brow, watching her eyelids flutter, her lips parting in a soft sigh of relief. I fed her small sips of tea, barely warm, flavored with honey, and watched her swallow, the edges of her eyes crinkling with effort. Each swallow was an act of courage, a reminder that this illness might steal her strength, but not her spirit. I remembered the sharp betrayal she'd once wielded against me, and contrasted it with the trembling vulnerability cradled in her hands now. Rage had driven me then, compassion steered me now, and I wondered if revenge had undone me more than healed me. An hour later, her breathing shifted, slow, measured, but with an uneasy hitch every few seconds. I sat on the arm of the couch, my heart pounding in my throat. Each breath she drew felt like a request for reassurance. I brushed a strand of hair from her forehead and murmured that I was right here. She reached up, fingers finding my wrist, her grip weak but insistent. My pulse shivered in response, a silent oath that I would never let go. Night settled in, and the apartment grew cold. I wrapped her in a soft blanket and joined her on the couch, folding my legs beneath me. We watched the city through the window, white headlights carving arcs across wet pavement, neon signs buzzing to life. She leaned into me, her body a faint weight pressed against mine, and I felt the steady thrum of her heartbeat. Every thump was a reassurance that, despite pain and fear, she was still here. Sleep eluded me. I stared at her closed eyes, tracing the shadows beneath her lashes with my mind. Memories drifted unbidden, her mocking smile as she sent that note, the sting of betrayal, the cold satisfaction of my own retaliation. Now those memories felt like ghosts in the corner of the room, present but fading. I clenched my jaw against the guilt that lingered. Had I been too harsh? Too vengeful? The line between justice and cruelty blurred under the weight of her fragile pulse. At 3 a.m, she shifted, head resting on my shoulder, lips parted as if mid-breath. I held her closer, rocking gently, humming a lullaby I hadn't sung since childhood. Her hand drifted from my wrist to my chest, fingertips grazing my heart. I felt the warmth of her skin, and with it a flicker of hope that love, once broken, could stitch itself back together, stronger, tempered by fire and tempered by care. When dawn broke, pale light filtering through the curtains, I tucked her into bed and left the kettle on the stove for fresh tea. She stirred as I placed the cup on her nightstand, eyes opening to meet mine. In that unguarded moment, the fear that had shadowed her features softened into something like trust. She sipped the tea and whispered, "Thank you for staying." My chest tightened, words I'd longed to hear. Outside, the morning traffic began to hum. Inside, we faced a new day marked by treatment schedules and careful pacing, but also by a fragile peace we'd forged from broken glass. As I helped her sit up, planning our next steps, blood tests, family calls, moments of rest, I understood that this river of uncertainty still ran deep. Yet with each sunrise, we would navigate its currents together, learning that healing sometimes flows from the gentlest touch rather than the sharpest blade. And so, as her phone chimed with appointment reminders, we embraced the morning's promise, that today, at least, we would move forward, together. The next morning, sunlight slipped through the blinds in thin, hesitant slats, like a promise not yet delivered. I found her in bed, blankets bunched at her waist, face pale beneath dark circles. Her phone lay on the nightstand, buzzing with reminders, cycle 1, day 2, nausea medication, hydration log. I sat on the edge of the mattress and took her hand. She looked at me with a fragile half-smile, as though mustering courage from some hidden well. Side effects started overnight, she whispered, voice raspy. I felt dizzy, and my stomach, she trailed off, pressing a hand against her abdomen. I rose and fetched a glass of water and the prescribed anti-nausea pills. Her fingers closed around the glass, and she tipped back her head to drink. I guided the pill to her lips, and she swallowed, blinking away the taste of chemicals. We moved slowly through our morning routine. I helped her into the shower, warm water sluicing over her, sending soft curls of steam into the air. She leaned against me, knees shaking, and I supported her until the tremors eased. I washed her hair gently, massaging her scalp to soothe the itch from early hair loss. She winced at every stray hair caught in the drain. I whispered, "I wish I could take this all away," and she shook her head. "You're already taking so much on," she said, voice muffled beneath her breath. "Just being here," her words broke off, tears glimmering at the corners of her eyes. I wrapped her in a towel and held her tight. The warmth of her skin against mine was both comfort and ache. After breakfast, toast soaked in sweetened yogurt so she could stomach it, we settled on the couch. I made her hold a heating pad over her abdomen. The steady pulse of warmth seemed to settle her nerves. Outside, the day hummed with errands and errands left undone, bills to pay, work emails to return, grocery items to restock. But here, time slowed as I read to her from a battered poetry book, verses about resilience and light, words I hoped would anchor her spirit. By afternoon, the nausea had given way to fatigue so profound her body felt unreal. Her limbs lay heavy like sediment in water. I helped her into pajamas and pulled an extra pillow behind her back. She closed her eyes, but sleep did not come. Instead, she drifted between drowsiness and worry, muttering about beauty routines lost. She'd lost handfuls of hair during the shower, and worries I could feel radiating off her. I knelt beside her and brushed the loose hairs from her pillow. "You're still beautiful," I said softly. "Every single day." She opened her eyes, a flicker of gratitude passing across her face. "Then promise me something," she murmured. "Promise you won't look at me like I'm fragile." "I need to feel strong." My throat tightened. "I promise," I said, voice catching. As evening approached, I cooked a light soup flavored with ginger, an ingredient to calm her stomach. She sipped cautiously, then managed a small smile at the taste. In that moment, I saw her defiance, the same woman who'd once betrayed me now fighting for every breath. I realized how thin the line between betrayal and survival could be, and how her actions were born of fear as much as malice. Night fell, and we sat together on the balcony, wrapped in blankets. The city lights blinked below like distant beacons. She rested her head on my shoulder, and I stroked her hair. "Today was hard," she said. "But not as hard as I thought it would be." I pressed a kiss to her forehead. "You did it. You faced it." She lifted her head and met my gaze. "And tomorrow?" she asked. "Tomorrow, we'll face it again. Together." I nodded, firm in my certainty. Beneath her fear and fatigue, I saw her resolve rekindling, a spark that no illness could fully extinguish. Inside, our apartment was quiet. The heating pad still pulsed warmth against the couch. We let silence settle around us, comfortable now, a sanctuary from the roar of side effects and second-guessing thoughts. In that hush, I understood that this cycle of treatment would test us relentlessly, but also that each moment of care, each small triumph, would bind us more tightly. And so, as the night deepened, we braced for the days ahead, armed not with vengeance or guilt, but with a shared determination to endure. Together, we would ride the currents of this new, uncertain river, one sunrise at a time. The dawn after our balcony vow arrived with unexpected stillness. I found her in the kitchen before sunrise, stirring tea with slow, deliberate movements, eyes unfocused, breath measured. The kitten padded around her ankles, weaving between her legs as if sensing the tension in the air. I hovered by the doorway, coffee in hand, and watched the way her shoulders rose and fell, the hesitancy in each sip. She glanced up when I set my mug beside hers. "I couldn't sleep," she confessed, voice raw. My mind kept racing through everything, appointments, side effects, work. Her words faded into a sigh that trembled on the cusp of tears. I slid onto the stool next to her, wrapping an arm around her waist. She leaned into me, forehead resting against my chest. The familiar ache of protectiveness welled up, mingled with a new fear. What if her body couldn't keep pace with her courage? Later, we headed to the hospital for routine blood work. The waiting room was less oppressive now, faces were kinder, nurses more apologetic about delays. Still, each moment spent perched on those plastic chairs felt like suspended breath. When the phlebotomist finally called her name, her hand went to her stomach, as if bracing against an unseen blow. I offered a gentle smile and stood behind her, hands ready to steady her shoulder. A sharp pinch, a quick flash of her skin as the needle found her vein. She bit her lip, eyes clenched shut against the sting. I whispered her name, softly enough that only she could hear. Her shoulders loosened, and minutes later she emerged with the bandage in place and a small paper ticket indicating our next follow-up. Relief flickered across her face, but then gave way to something else, anxiety about what those results might reveal. Back home, exhaustion settled deep into her bones. She collapsed onto the couch, shoes kicked off, coat tossed carelessly aside. I knelt at her feet and pulled on her slippers, tucking her feet beneath the blanket. She watched me, eyes heavy. "Thank you," she murmured. For this." I brushed a kiss to the top of her head. "Always." As the afternoon light waned, we attempted normalcy. I flipped through a magazine, narrating absurd headlines in a silly voice. She managed a small laugh between coughs. Her hand reached for mine, fingers curling until her palm pressed taut against my skin. I felt the tremor in her grip and squeezed back, letting her know she didn't have to face this alone. That evening, her phone rang. It was her manager, checking in on her return-to-work timeline. She hesitated before answering, jaw tightening as she explained the delays. I stood behind her, hand on her shoulder. From the corner of my eye, I saw her posture slump as she agreed to postpone her return another week. After she hung up, her eyes stung with tears of frustration. "I feel useless," she whispered, voice cracking. "I'm letting everyone down." I pulled her into my lap and rocked her gently. The kitten nosed between us, purring against her side. "You're not useless," I said, holding her face between my hands so our eyes met. "You're fighting every day. That's more than most people do." Her breath hitched, and she clung tighter, as if afraid I'd slip away. "Promise me," she breathed, "promise you'll remember that, even when I can't." I pressed my forehead to hers. "I promise." We spent the rest of the night in soft conversation, no grand declarations, just whispered plans for the weekend, ideas for movies we'd watch when she felt stronger, thoughts of visiting the park when the weather turned warmer. In that gentle exchange, the tension in her shoulders eased, replaced by a fragile peace born of shared hope. Before sleep claimed us, she reached out under the covers and found my hand. Our fingers intertwined, and the quiet hum of the city outside lulled us toward rest. I realized then that our story, shattered by betrayal, reshaped by revenge, tested by illness, was still being written. Each new day would bring fresh challenges, but also moments like this, two hearts linked against the world's uncertainties. And as the night deepened, I whispered into the darkness, "Together, always." She murmured back, and in that promise lay the strength to keep moving forward, one small, brave step at a time. The morning sun filtered through the curtains in soft beams as I woke to the hush of our apartment. She was already up, sitting at the kitchen table with her phone in hand, eyes fixed on the screen. I slid out of bed and wrapped myself in yesterday's cardigan, noticing how her shoulders tensed when I entered. The kettle was already steaming, and two mismatched mugs waited on the counter, one for tea, one for warm lemon water. She looked up as I poured. Her face was pale, the faint bruise from yesterday's blood draw still visible on her arm. I set the drinks down and slipped into the chair beside her. Without words, we shared the quiet ritual of morning fluids, the steam rising like a small reassurance between us. My heart thudded when her phone buzzed, a message from the clinic. I held my breath, feeling the familiar coil of dread tighten in my chest. She stared at the screen, lips pressed together. Her hand shook slightly as she opened the message. The counts have dropped, she read aloud, voice trembling. They want to adjust the treatment schedule. A cold wave washed over me, my palms grew slick, my jaw locked. I pressed my thumb to her knuckles, willing strength into her grip. She swallowed hard, eyes glistening. I thought we'd be past this, she whispered, voice cracking like thin ice. My throat went dry, guilt and fear crashing inside me. I wrapped my arms around her, pulling her close until her cheek rested against my collarbone. Her breath came fast against my neck, frantic, short, as if each exhale might shatter. After a moment, she pulled back and tucked the phone into her pocket. I don't want to do another cycle so soon, she said, voice low. I feel like my body will crumble. I reached out, brushing a lock of hair from her forehead. We'll talk to the doctor, I said softly. We'll explore every option. My own words sounded uncertain, but I meant them. We spent the day between hopeful distraction and anxious planning. I suggested a walk in the courtyard to get fresh air. She agreed, wrapping a light jacket around her trembling frame. Outside, the garden was in bloom, pale petals drifting on the breeze like confessions. She leaned on me as we strolled along the path, her gait unsteady. I felt every shift of her weight, every tremor in her limbs, and vowed silently to carry her whenever she needed it. Later, as we sat on a bench beneath the old oak, she curled into herself and let the tears come. Her jaw relaxed, lips parting in silent sobs. My world narrowed to that moment, her pain laid bare, raw and honest. I stroked her back, whispering, "It's okay to be frightened." Her tears soaked through my shirt, and I felt the dampness, a living reminder of her vulnerability. That evening, we called the clinic again. The conversation was clinical: treatment adjustments, potential side effects, a roster of specialists. She listened with wide eyes, nodding at each recommendation. I held the phone for her, letting her rest her head against my shoulder as the list of next steps unfolded. When the call ended, she let out a shaky breath, as if exhaling the weight of the world. I guided her to the couch and draped a plush blanket over her legs. She closed her eyes, cheek resting on the sofa's arm. I fetched the herbal tea Anna had brought, inhaling its lavender scent before offering it to her. She sipped slowly, the warmth softening the tension in her features. I sat beside her, letting the silence settle around us like a blanket. As night deepened, the apartment lights dimmed to a soft glow. She nestled into my side, one hand tangled in my shirt, the other clutching the tea mug. Her breathing evened out, the earlier fear giving way to exhaustion. I pressed a kiss to her temple, feeling the slight tremor beneath my lips. Before sleep claimed us, she whispered, "Thank you for not giving up on me." My heart clenched. "There's nowhere else I'd rather be," I replied, voice thick with emotion. Outside, the world continued its restless turn, but inside, we forged a fragile peace, two hearts bound by love and the fierce determination to face whatever came next, together. The dawn that followed carried a brittle clarity. I woke to her absence beside me, just the soft rumble of the radiator and the pale light spilling across our bed. I rose and padded into the kitchen, finding her curled in the armchair, blanket drawn up to her chin, eyes closed in quiet vigil over the empty mug at her feet. The papers from yesterday's clinic visit lay on the table, revised schedules, contact numbers, a new medication list. Her fingers still clutched the edge of the last sheet, knuckles white with exhaustion. She opened her eyes as I poured coffee into 2 mugs. "Morning," she whispered, voice hoarse. I set the second mug in her lap and slid onto the seat beside her. Her gaze drifted to the documents, and I followed it. "They want to start the next cycle earlier," she said, tilting her head as if that simple motion carried the weight of every choice we'd made. I reached out, covering her hand with mine. "We'll adjust. We'll do it when you're ready." Outside, the city stirred, distant traffic, a bus rumbling by, birds calling from the rooftops. Inside, our apartment felt suspended in time, each moment stretched by anticipation. She sipped her coffee, brow furrowing as she tasted its bitterness. I nudged a small pitcher of cream toward her. She poured a splash, nodding gratitude. We sat in companionable silence, the only sound our synchronized breathing. Later, we ventured to the pharmacy to pick up her new prescription. She walked slowly, leaning on me for support as we navigated the narrow aisles. The pharmacist offered a kindly smile, explaining dosage adjustments and possible side effects. She nodded along, eyes tracking the pharmacist's lips as if searching for hidden warnings. I jotted notes on the back of a receipt, determined not to let a single instruction slip through the cracks. Back home, the afternoon sun filtered through half-closed blinds, painting stripes across the floor. She lay on the couch, pillow propped beneath her head, as I arranged the pills on the coffee table. Each capsule seemed to glint under the light, a promise and a threat in miniature. She watched me with both trust and fear, trust that I would guide her safely, fear of what these tiny vessels might unleash. When the moment came, she sat upright, hands trembling. I handed her a glass of water and one pill. She swallowed it in 2 small gulps, then exhaled with relief. I brushed a kiss to her temple. "You did it," I said. She half smiled, tears brimming at the corners of her eyes. "I did what I had to," she replied, voice barely above a whisper. The rest of the day passed in quiet tasks, preparing bland soup, tracking her fluid intake, monitoring her temperature. Each check felt like a ritual, a way to anchor ourselves in routine against the backdrop of uncertainty. When fatigue claimed her, I helped her into bed and tucked the blankets around her. She reached for my hand, squeezing it with surprising strength. "Thank you," she murmured. I pressed my forehead to hers. "Always." That night, sleep remained elusive. I lay beside her, fingers tracing patterns on her arm, listening to the soft rhythm of her breath. Memories drifted through my mind, moments of laughter before the betrayal, the cruelty of forwarded messages, the harsh satisfaction of revenge, and every fragile step of her healing. I realized how intertwined our lives had become, every twist of fate binding us closer. Just before midnight, she stirred and opened her eyes. In the unforgiving darkness, I saw fear and determination dancing in those pupils. "Will I get through this?" she asked, voice trembling. I sat up and gathered her in my arms. "You will," I said, voice unwavering. "No matter what the tests say, I'm here." She exhaled a shaky breath and pressed her cheek against my chest. "Together," she whispered. I kissed the top of her head and held her tighter, feeling her heartbeat settle beneath my palm. Outside, the city slept under a blanket of stars. Inside, 2 hearts beat in cautious unison, bound by love carved from betrayal and strengthened by shared struggle. And as the night deepened around us, I knew that whatever dawn brought, hope or fear, we would face it side by side, step by determined step. I woke before her, the apartment bathed in that liminal gray where night hesitates to let go. On the coffee table lay half-empty mugs and the crumpled printout of tomorrow's infusion schedule, another reminder that our lives now moved according to protocols and timetables. I slipped from bed and found her on the couch, curled beneath the same soft blanket she'd used since her treatment began. She half opened her eyes, offering me a small, tired smile that seemed to say, "I'm still here." I poured 2 cups of tea, her chamomile, mine black, and carried them back. She accepted the mug with both hands, wrapping cold fingers around its warmth. "Morning," she whispered, voice thick with sleep and something deeper, resignation, maybe, or resolve. I sat beside her, and we watched dawn crawl across the walls in silent company. When our phones chimed with appointment reminders, she exhaled as if the sound itself weighed on her chest. "Ready?" I asked quietly. She nodded, setting her mug down and smoothing the blanket at her knees. I offered my arm, and she steeled herself against it. Together, we moved toward another day defined by hospital corridors and the steady drip of life-saving fluid. At the clinic, she slipped into the infusion chair with practiced caution, her body so accustomed to this routine it seemed almost mechanical. I pulled up a stool beside her, heart pounding against my ribs each time a nurse brushed past with a trolley of supplies. The 4 went in smoothly, she flinched, and I caught her hand, thumb stroking her knuckles in a silent promise. The nurse adjusted the flow rate and left us alone, leaving only the soft hum of the pump and the distant murmur of other patients. "I hate how this feels," she said after a long moment, voice low. Like I'm tethered to a machine. I nodded. But it's also saving you, I reminded her gently. Her eyes tracked the liquid tracing slow rivulets through the tubing. I know, she murmured. Still, sometimes I wish we could go back to coffee dates and secrets whispered over chipped mugs. My chest tightened at the memory of that first betrayal, years ago, and how we'd rebuilt from the shards. I squeezed her hand. We will have those again. An hour later, the nurse disconnected her. Her veins were tired, bruised, tiny battlefields won and lost. She rose slowly, leaning on me as we exited the treatment room. Outside, the lobby buzzed with voices and the scent of disinfectant. I hailed a cab, bringing her home as the city swirled by in motion-blurred streaks of color. Inside our apartment, she collapsed onto the bed, exhaustion weighing her down like a physical force. I closed the curtains against the late afternoon glare and pulled the blanket over her. She lay in the half-darkness, breathing shallow, her eyelids fluttering in the dance between consciousness and oblivion. I kissed her temple, feeling the feeble warmth of her skin beneath my lips. Dinner was something simple, scrambled eggs and soft toast, chosen for ease and comfort. She ate in small bites, every swallow an act of bravery. I watched her, heart full of pride and sorrow in equal measure. When the plate was empty, she leaned back, stomach heavy. "Thank you," she whispered. "For all of this." I brushed a strand of hair behind her ear. "I'd do anything," I said, voice thick. "Anything to keep you here." The evening stretched out in quiet companionship. We streamed an old black and white movie, something light, nearly absurd in its melodrama. She drifted in and out of sleep on the couch, her head in my lap. Each breath she took was a small victory, each rise and fall of her chest a testament to endurance. I stroked her hair, murmuring the occasional line from the film to keep her tethered to the world. At midnight, she stirred, eyes opening in that vulnerable way that spoke of lingering fears. "What if it doesn't work?" she asked, voice small. I gathered her into my arms. "It will," I said firmly, though uncertainty curled in my gut. "But if it doesn't, we'll face whatever comes next, together." She nestled closer, sighing against my shoulder. The rain began to patter against the window, a soft soundtrack to our vigil. Before sleep claimed her again, I pressed a kiss to her forehead. The tremor in her hands had eased, if only for a moment. Outside, the city slumbered beneath the steady drum of rain. Inside, two hearts beat in unison, bruised, battered, but unbroken. As I stood and pulled the blanket up around her shoulders, I realized that our story was nearing its final chapter, redemption born of betrayal, love forged in adversity, and the unshakable truth that some bonds, once tested by fire, emerge stronger than steel. The dawn light slipped through the curtains in tender fingers, and I found her already awake, propped against the headboard with pillows piled behind her. Her hair was thin now, each strand catching the glow like fragile threads of gold. I moved quietly to her side, brushing my fingertips along her cheek, feeling the faint warmth, the gentle rise and fall of her breath. In that hushed moment, the weight of everything we'd endured settled between us: betrayal's sting, revenge's cold satisfaction, illness's harsh toll, and now this fragile peace we'd fought to reclaim. We dressed in soft clothes and walked hand in hand through our apartment, passing the coffee table where the last infusion schedule lay folded next to the poetry book that had become our evening ritual. She paused to trace the edge of the paper with her fingertip, hesitating as though afraid to disturb it. I squeezed her hand, reminding her silently that this schedule marked not only treatment but survival, a testament to her courage and our commitment to one another. By mid-morning we stepped into the hospital foyer for her final scan, the moment we dreamed of since her counts had first dropped. The lobby buzzed quietly with clipped conversations and the distant cadence of rolling wheelchairs. She paused at the automatic doors, breath catching as cool air sighed across her skin. I wrapped my arm around her waist, steadying her as she leaned into me, and whispered, "Whatever happens, I'm right here." Her nod was small, but her eyes glistened with something fierce: hope. Inside the scanning suite, she lay on the narrow table, pressed into the machine's embrace. I watched through the observation window, heart throbbing like a drum, mind replaying every step of this journey, our laughter before the betrayal, her confession of illness, the trap I'd set and the mercy that followed. The hum of the machine masked my own pounding pulse. When the technician slipped out and the door clicked shut, I exhaled a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. Minutes later, the doctor returned with cautious smiles. He spoke in measured tones. The lesions have shrunk significantly. There's no new activity. We're moving into observation mode. My chest tightened as relief and lingering fear tangled inside me. She closed her eyes, leaning back against me as though the news might dissolve before she could believe it. I pressed a kiss to her temple, tasting the salt of tears she hadn't yet shed. We left the hospital under a sky washed in late afternoon gold. Outside, the city moved around us, buses rattling, pedestrians hurrying to evening plans, but we felt suspended, as if time itself paused so we could savor this moment. She stopped at the curb, turning to face the sun, eyes closed as its warmth painted her skin. I wrapped my arms around her from behind, resting my chin on her shoulder. And there, in that glow, we let the years of fear and vengeance melt away. On the way home, we detoured through the park where we'd first met for coffee years ago, before secrets, before betrayal. The benches were slick with dew, and early blossoms trembled in the breeze. She walked slowly, hand in hand with me, tracing the familiar path as memories bloomed around us, our initial laughter, the ease of unburdened friendship, the moment we first discovered the depths of each other's hearts. We found the old bench beneath the magnolia tree, its petals drifting like pale tears onto the grass. She sat, and I knelt before her, gathering petals in my hands. "I'm sorry," she whispered, voice trembling. "For everything before you showed me what forgiveness means." I looked into her eyes, seeing both the girl who'd once wounded me and the woman who'd fought so hard to survive. "Thank you," I said, voice catching. "For trusting me with your truth, even when it scared you, and for giving me the chance to stand by you." We spoke then of the future, quiet dreams of small joys, cooking dinner at home, planning a trip to the coast, watching sunsets from our balcony. Each idea bloomed between us like promise. I slipped the magnolia petals into her open palm, and she closed her fingers around them, letting them press into her skin like vows. As twilight settled, we rose and walked back through the park, shoulders brushing, hearts light enough to believe in new beginnings. And though the river of our lives had been twisted by betrayal and tested by illness, it now carried us toward uncharted shores, together, tethered by love that had endured the sharpest knives and the coldest nights. In that shared silence, we understood, healing is not an ending but the first step of a journey forever unfolding.